A young child burst from his home in terror, racing toward a sanitation worker while tears streamed down his face. Within moments, squad cars flooded the neighborhood and authorities cordoned off the entire area. The shocking truth, this frightened. Boy shared with the trash collector would transform a routine morning pickup into something much more sinister, exposing a hidden horror that had been brewing behind the facade of a peaceful suburban community. For more than 10 years, Joe Harris had been handling the identical waste collection route through Maplewood, New Jersey. Without exception, every Tuesday and Friday morning at precisely 8 a.m., he would navigate his municipal garbage vehicle along the curved residential roads. Regardless of weather conditions, he had memorized every pothole in the asphalt, recognized each family pet that would bark upon hearing his truck's motor, and could identify almost every residence on Sycamore Lane simply by their window shutters' colors. In Joe's mind, he wasn't merely a trash hauler. He considered himself woven into the community's daily fabric, appearing as predictably as sunrise, exchanging nods or waves with early morning joggers, and tossing back children's soccer balls that had rolled into the roadway. He observed details, subtle changes, disrupted routines, the secrets people attempted to conceal. Garbage revealed stories, and Joe had mastered the art of interpreting them without passing judgment. The morning air carried an unusual chill, accompanied by the type of sharp wind that rattled mailbox flags and sent partially filled containers tumbling along sidewalks. Joe's work partner, Raul, had phoned in with flu symptoms, leaving him to handle the truck solo. This made his rounds more time-consuming, though Joe appreciated the quiet solitude. There was something calming about the engine's steady drone and the familiar clatter of metal containers. He was running 30 minutes past his usual schedule when he approached House 213, a white colonial featuring green accents situated at Sycamore's far end. Joe recognized this residence intimately. It housed Stephanie Daniels, a single parent who pulled long hours at St. Joseph's Hospital, along with her reserved 9-year-old son, Eli. Joe had watched the boy transform from a pudgy toddler who enjoyed waving at the truck into a thin child who seldom displayed happiness. While Joe hoisted the container from the curb, he heard the front door's hinges groan. He looked up casually, anticipating Stephanie departing for work, or perhaps Eli awaiting his school transportation. Instead, he witnessed something that made him freeze completely. Eli rushed from the doorway wearing only socks, no jacket, no school bag, just a red sweatshirt and pure panic in his expression. His face was flushed, marked with tears. This wasn't a dash for the bus, this was an escape for survival. Before Joe could process what was happening, the child had reached him and thrown himself into Joe's embrace, clutching his work pants like someone drowning would grasp a life preserver. "Please," Eli wept. "Don't let him hurt her anymore. Please, Mr. Joe, he's attacking my mom." Joe immediately dropped to one knee, abandoning the trash bin. "Hey there, Eli. Who's attacking her?" The boy gestured frantically toward the house, his entire body shaking. "Todd. He returned last night. Mom said he was intoxicated again. He struck her this morning. He secured the door. She screamed and told me to escape." Joe's breathing stopped. That name was familiar. Todd Mercer. He'd spotted him occasionally, always dressed in suits too expensive for this neighborhood, always carrying himself like he was superior to everyone around him. Joe had noticed bruising on Stephanie months earlier when she'd emerged late for trash collection, mumbling something about stumbling on her porch. He'd accepted her explanation, or perhaps he'd chosen not to probe deeper. Now there was no avoiding the truth. The fear in Eli's voice pierced through the cold morning air like an alarm. Joe retrieved his cell phone and called emergency services. "This is Joe Harris. I'm located at 213 Sycamore Lane. A child just ran to me crying. He reports his mother is being assaulted inside the residence. This is an emergency. Please dispatch officers right away." The emergency operator remained composed and professional, walking him through necessary questions. Joe provided every detail he possessed: names, location, Eli's account, all while the boy clung to his arm, shaking like a frightened animal. By the time Joe concluded the call, distant, Sirens were already wailing in the background. "Eli, you made the correct choice, son," Joe whispered. "You're protected now, and we're going to ensure your mother is safe too." The boy remained silent, simply nodding while wiping his eyes with his hoodie sleeve, his gaze fixed on the house, where he'd abandoned his entire world. In under 5 minutes, Sycamore Lane's tranquil atmosphere was shattered. Emergency lights painted the bare trees in red and blue, as police vehicles arrived from both directions. Neighbors peered through window coverings. Several even ventured onto their front yards with coffee mugs, their expressions growing concerned. A woman in navy blue, Sergeant Monroe, exited the lead patrol car. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with silver streaks running through her dark hair and a sharp, businesslike demeanor. She knelt beside Eli. "I'm Sergeant Monroe, honey. Can you tell me who's inside that house?" Eli sniffled. "Todd Mercer. He's my mom's boyfriend. He drinks heavily. He hurts her when he gets angry." Monroe nodded briskly and stood, speaking into her radio microphone. Officers moved strategically, one circling to the rear, others approaching the entrance with caution. Joe stood aside, with Eli, feeling powerless, his fists clenched at his sides. He was simply a sanitation worker. This wasn't his area of expertise, yet he couldn't abandon them. Then the sound erupted, a woman's scream, piercing and desperate, followed by the unmistakable crash of something substantial hitting the floor, either glass or furniture. Monroe raised her hand. "Move in!" Officers rushed forward. The door was forced open. Inside, pandemonium broke loose. Shouting, commotion, more yelling. Joe held Eli protectively as the boy pressed his hands over his ears. And then came relief. 2 officers emerged, supporting Stephanie Daniels. Her lip was split open, her eye already swelling shut. Her sweater hung torn from one shoulder. Her wrist was twisted at an unnatural angle. She appeared shattered, but she was breathing. Immediately behind her, officers dragged Todd Mercer in restraints, his face contorted with defiance. "She's fabricating everything," he bellowed to anyone who would listen. "She's constantly creating stories. You people have no idea what actually occurred." Joe didn't move, but mentally he responded, "We understand now." Todd Mercer's protests echoed throughout Sycamore Lane, but nobody was paying attention anymore. His costly dress shirt was disheveled, his face red with rage, and his arrogance was crumbling with each passing moment. 2 officers flanked him, maintaining firm control as they escorted him toward the patrol vehicle. Stephanie stood unsteadily, her face swollen, bruises spreading across her jawline like dark flowers. Her right wrist appeared fractured, severely, swollen beneath her sweater. Eli rushed to her, pressing his face against her torso as she winced from contact, but instinctively wrapped her left arm around him. Joe remained nearby, uncertain whether his presence was appropriate, but unable to. "Leave!" Stephanie gazed at him through her uninjured eye. "You remained here," she whispered. Joe nodded, his voice hoarse. "Wasn't going to abandon you too." Officers immediately requested medical assistance. Paramedics arrived within minutes and began treating Stephanie on the porch, carefully examining her wrist and eye, asking whether she'd lost consciousness. She responded quietly, constantly checking on Eli as if confirming he was still present. Sergeant Monroe approached Joe with a small notepad. "We'll require a statement from you, Mr. Harris. What you witnessed, what the child told you, anything pertinent." Joe nodded and recounted everything: Eli's desperate escape, his plea for help, the emergency call. When Monroe inquired about his familiarity with the family, Joe added gently, "I've worked this route for over a decade. I see these people more often than my own relatives. I might not know what occurs behind closed doors, but I recognize something was terribly wrong today." The sergeant gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "You made the right decision. Many people wouldn't have." Another officer approached. "Ma'am, the child mentioned a grandparent living nearby. Says they just returned from there this morning." Monroe turned to Stephanie. "Is this accurate? Your mother? Where is she?" Stephanie looked up, eyes widening. She's only 4 blocks away on Chestnut Avenue. We left there around 7 this morning. She was the one who helped me hide our travel documents." Joe's eyebrows furrowed. "Travel documents?" Stephanie's voice trembled. "Todd was planning to take Eli overseas. Said he had business connections in Dubai. I refused to let him take my son away. That's when he lost control. He started drinking again. That's why we went to my mother's, to hide the paperwork and buy ourselves time." Monroe's expression hardened. "Is it possible he might go to your mother's house now?" "Yes," Stephanie whispered, barely audible. "He was screaming about it earlier. Said he'd tear them from her hands if she didn't surrender them." Monroe instantly activated her radio. Within seconds, officers were en route to Chestnut Avenue. The street, previously filled with curious neighbors watching from windows, had grown quiet. The distant sound of a helicopter added a surreal quality to the morning. Eli hadn't left his mother's side. When paramedics helped Stephanie into the ambulance, the boy looked terrified. Joe crouched beside him. "They're just going to help her, buddy. You'll see her again soon." Eli's lip quivered. "Can I ride with her?" "We'll follow right behind," Monroe offered gently. "Your mom needs medical treatment first, then you can be with her at the station." As Joe helped Eli into the patrol car's back seat, he caught the boy's hand in his own. "You're the most courageous kid I've ever encountered," he said. "You did the most difficult thing a child could do today, and you saved her life." Eli didn't respond, but his grip on Joe's hand tightened slightly. The convoy of police cruisers and ambulance departed toward downtown. Joe returned to his truck, his route half completed, his uniform stained with salt and tears. He climbed into the cab and sat motionless for several minutes, hands on the steering wheel, mind racing. As he prepared to drive away, his phone buzzed, with a message from dispatch. "We've received missed pickup complaints from Sycamore and Jefferson. Everything okay out there?" Joe stared at the message, then at the street in his rearview mirror, now scattered with footprints, broken glass, and the lingering presence of what had transpired. He typed back quickly, "Assisting with domestic emergency call. Will complete. Pickups as soon as possible, may be running late." No response came. He set the phone aside and started the engine. An hour elapsed before he reached the police station. He parked his truck in the rear lot beside a row of impounded vehicles. As he stepped out, he noticed the dark blue Lexus positioned near the entrance, Todd Mercer's car, recognizable by the dented bumper Joe had seen previously. Inside, the station hummed with quiet intensity. Officers moved between rooms, phones rang continuously, voices rose and fell in urgent conversation. Joe was directed to an interview room where a detective introduced himself as Detective Raymond Kessler, a middle-aged man with weary eyes and a calm demeanor. Joe repeated his account again, this time officially recorded. Every detail from Eli's appearance to the police arrival. Kessler took detailed notes, nodding periodically. "We believe Mr. Mercer had international connections," the detective revealed. "There were electronic airline tickets on his laptop. He was planning to leave the country with the boy next week." Joe exhaled slowly. "If that child hadn't escaped this morning." Kessler nodded. "You likely saved both their lives." "You did well, Mr. Harris." In the waiting area, Joe spotted Stephanie seated on a bench, her wrist bandaged, a dressing under her eye, a warm coat draped across her shoulders. Eli sat beside her, his head resting on her uninjured arm. Joe approached quietly. Stephanie looked up. "You again?" she said, her voice rough but warmer now. Joe rubbed the back of his neck. "Just wanted to ensure you two were all right. I'll leave. You alone after this?" She shook her head. "No. Stay, please." Eli looked up and managed a weak smile. "Are you going to be our garbage collector forever?" Joe chuckled. "That's the plan, kid. Unless you decide to fire me." Stephanie laughed, a hoarse but genuine laugh. It was the first time Joe had seen her truly smile. "You were running late today," she said suddenly. "You're never late." Joe nodded. "Yeah, my partner called in sick. Had to use a different truck. Slowed everything down." Her smile faded slightly, but her eyes remained locked on his. "Maybe you were supposed to be late." Joe sat beside them, his large frame occupying most of the remaining bench space. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The station noise faded into background. It was just the three of them, Eli seeking comfort, Stephanie healing quietly, Joe sitting with the weight of what almost happened still pressing on his shoulders. The journey home from the police station wasn't what any of them had anticipated. It wasn't in a patrol car or with an official escort, but in Joe's municipal garbage truck. After providing statements and completing paperwork, Stephanie reunited with her mother, who had been safely collected from her home by the officers dispatched earlier. The immediate danger had passed, but the emotional trauma still lingered, like morning fog. When transportation back to Sycamore Lane became an issue, no taxi available, no family vehicle accessible, Stephanie had virtually no possessions with her, no purse, no house keys, just the hospital-provided coat and her son holding her hand. Joe stepped forward and offered quietly, "I could give you a ride home in the truck if you don't mind the odor." He smiled awkwardly, expecting them to refuse, but Stephanie surprised him by accepting. "Honestly, after today, I don't care what it smells like. I just want to go home." Eli grinned, a spark of childlike excitement appearing in his eyes for the first time all day. "You mean we get to ride up front?" Joe opened the door. "Front seats are all yours, partner." They climbed into the cab, Stephanie sitting between Joe and her son, while her mother, Mrs. Evelyn Daniels, took the fold-down jump seat behind them. It was cramped and carried the faint aroma of hydraulic fluid, old fruit peels, and city streets, but to them, it felt like refuge. As Joe started, the engine, the truck's rumble came alive, steady and reliable. They pulled away from the station as the sun began setting behind the buildings, casting golden light across Maplewood. Inside the cab, Eli bombarded Joe with questions. How fast the compactor operated, what was the heaviest item he'd ever lifted, whether he'd discovered anything unusual. Joe answered patiently, his deep voice filled with dry humor. "Once found a wedding gown in the trash with the price tag still attached. No clue what happened there, but I hope the groom ran faster than I did." Stephanie remained mostly quiet during the ride, her head gently resting against the passenger window, her body clearly sore but her expression more relaxed than it had been all day. She didn't speak much, but her silence felt different now, less defensive, more peaceful. Evelyn observed her daughter from the seat behind, her lips pressed together in a mixture of sadness and thankfulness. Occasionally, she'd glance at Joe, studying him as if he were an unexpected piece of a puzzle she was trying to solve. When they turned onto Sycamore Lane, the street had returned to its quiet state, just as it had been that morning. The scattered glass had been cleaned up, and the patrol car that had blocked the corner was gone. Still, the memory of what had occurred there seemed to hang in the evening air. As the garbage truck stopped in front of House 213, Joe jumped down and opened the door for them. Eli hopped out first, followed by Evelyn, then Stephanie, moving slowly now, careful with each step. Joe offered his hand as she descended. She accepted it without hesitation, her fingers wrapping around his, her grip stronger than he'd expected. When her feet touched the ground, she didn't release his hand immediately. "You know," she said, her voice soft. "People drive past this house constantly, mowing lawns, walking dogs. I've smiled at them, waved like everything was fine, but you stopped." Joe's voice caught in his throat. He wasn't accustomed to praise, especially not the kind that emerged from places of pain. He looked down at his work boots, then back up. "I didn't stop because I knew what to do. I stopped because I couldn't figure out how to keep walking." They entered the house together. The front door had been temporarily repaired with plywood and a latch, and police tape still hung loosely across the frame. Inside, the living room had been straightened, but the damage remained visible. Cracks in the wall, a shattered lamp, dried blood near the couch's edge. Stephanie paused at the entrance, her shoulders tensing. Evelyn placed a comforting hand on her back. "I'll prepare tea," she said, guiding her daughter to sit while she disappeared into the kitchen. Joe lingered at the doorway, uncertain whether to stay or leave. Eli tugged at his sleeve. "Are you coming inside?" Joe looked toward Stephanie. She gave a small nod, so he stepped inside slowly, almost reverently, as if entering a sacred space. He sat on a chair's armrest near the window, quietly surveying the room. A photograph lay on the floor, Stephanie, Eli, and Todd, smiling on a beach from happier times. Joe picked it up, brushed it off, and placed it face down on the side table. Stephanie noticed and nodded appreciatively. Evelyn returned with 4 mugs, setting them down gently. The scent of chamomile drifted through the air, comforting in its simplicity. They drank in silence for a moment before Stephanie spoke again. "They're holding Todd overnight. They'll file charges tomorrow. Domestic battery, child endangerment, attempted kidnapping. They're adding DUI since he tried to drive away drunk with me in the car." Joe said nothing, but his hand gripped the mug tighter. "Do you think he'll actually go to prison?" Eli asked, his voice hesitant, almost fearful of the answer. Stephanie exhaled deeply. "He has money, he has attorneys, but I have something I didn't have before." She reached out, wrapping an arm around Eli. "I have people who witnessed everything, people who listened." Her eyes moved toward Joe. "And that makes all the difference now." The sun sank lower, painting the walls in amber and copper tones. Eli yawned. Evelyn suggested he go rest, and after a reluctant glance at Joe, he finally agreed. Stephanie walked Joe to the door. Outside, the air was crisp and still, the world continuing its evening routines as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, the bruises on her face already deepening. "You know, the last man who stood in that spot told me. He'd destroy me if I ever embarrassed him." Joe's eyebrows raised. "And here I am, a garbage collector in your doorway. What would the neighbors think?" Stephanie smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Let them think whatever they want. You collected more than trash today, Joe. You gathered up the pieces of a broken family." He chuckled, then grew serious. "Are you going to be okay?" She nodded, not automatically, but slowly with conviction. "Yes, we'll heal. Not immediately, but we will. And you? What about your job?" Joe shrugged. "Dispatch is still waiting for my report. I might get written up, maybe worse, but I'd make the same choice again." Stephanie looked at him for a long moment, then stepped forward and embraced him. Gentle, careful, but genuine. "You ever want to visit again?" she whispered. "You don't have to wait for trash day." Joe smiled as he walked back to his truck, climbing in just as the street lamps flickered to life. As he drove away, the empty containers rattled softly in the back, but his heart felt full. That day, he hadn't just collected garbage. He'd collected courage, truth, and something deeper. A quiet kind of heroism that didn't wear badges or demand recognition, just a man doing his job and knowing when to stop because it mattered.